Hi, friends. Great to be with you for this week's Wednesday Bible study. I sure miss seeing you all in person and gathering in Dishman Chapel for Bible study. But we've given the gift of technology, and gosh, if we didn't know how to use it up to now, we're sure learning. And I'm learning right along with many of you. I've got a little bit different of a setting than I did, different room in the house than I did last week. Hopefully, it won't be quite as difficult to watch and view and all of that. So I'm learning right along with you. Thanks for your grace as we do this together. You'll see me looking down sometimes at the Bible, at the outline. I sent you an outline, emailed at least to those of you who have been a part of the Bible study in the past and for whom I have an email address. So pull that outline up now. Place that on your computer or have it somewhere in front of you so that you can follow along as we go through our Bible study together. We've been in the book of Genesis now for a number of weeks. Wow, since when? Back in January, and now we're in the middle of March. Genesis is a big book, one of the original 5 books of the Old Testament, often called the 5 books of Moses, often known as the Torah. It is a collection of laws going way back. It was thought to be authored by Moses or by those who were writing in Moses' name. These first 5 books were essential books for our Jewish friends and for the precursor to the New Testament. And so Genesis literally means beginnings, and it is our beginnings as the covenant people of God. We Gentiles by adoption, of course. So the book of Genesis we've been walking through since chapter 1 outlines a God who we are coming to know as God creates and continues to create and continues to make relationship with God's people. God does that through a particular group of people. God does that through a particular family. So God's been doing that most recently through the family of Abraham and through Abraham's descendants. And God has made certain promises to Abraham and his descendants. Among those promises is to make of them a great nation, to bless them so that they can be a blessing. A great thing for all of us to remember. We are blessed people, but not just blessed for its own sake, but blessed to be a blessing to the world. And so we continue in that trajectory through the descendants of Abraham, and we are now up to Joseph. Just to recap just a little bit from last week, you may remember that Joseph is one of a bunch of brothers, sons of Jacob, and Joseph is the envy of his brothers. Joseph is criticized by his brothers. Joseph is envied for his close relationship with the father, Jacob, and Joseph has this colored coat that is a symbol of that close, tight connection he has with his father Jacob. The brothers devise a plan to kill their brother Joseph out of jealousy and envy, but some of the brothers intervene. I'm summarizing in order to get up to where we are now. Some of the brothers intervene and decide not to kill Joseph, but rather to throw him into a pit, come back and save him later. Well, they throw him into the pit, they come back, he's gone. He's been sold to traders who sell Joseph into slavery into the land of Egypt. So Joseph has now gone across international borders into the nation of Egypt, which is a slave state. It's ruled by a ruling class. Pharaoh is the emperor, and then there is a ruling class, and then there is a slave class. And Joseph enters in as a slave. He goes through a lot of ups and downs, earns the favor of some and then loses that favor, spends a bunch of time in prison. But all the while, we see Joseph in the book of Genesis earning the favor of people because he is staying faithful to God. We see Joseph maturing in his faith in God. And we see Joseph ascribing all of his success, whatever success Joseph has, we see him ascribing that to the Lord. So it's a good remembrance for all of us that we can ascribe whatever blessings, whatever gifts we have received as blessings straight from God. God is the author of all good things. God is the author of all good gifts. So whatever good comes our way, it's because of the Lord. And so that's a good thing to remember right now while we're separated, while we're in this crisis. good to remember good gifts and that they come from the Lord. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in Joseph's story as it progresses along. It's a good thing to remember. All right. I'm going to adjust this camera just a little bit so that there's not so much glare on you. I'm afraid you've got a little bit of glare from the light above me in the room. So let me adjust that just a little bit. Let's see if that's a little bit better. Well, maybe not. All right, well, we'll keep going. So tonight we pick up on chapter 41 in the book of Genesis. So turn with me there in your Bibles. I'll read and stop along the way and make certain points. But in chapter 41, the stakes certainly grow higher for Joseph. Joseph has been in prison. 2 years have passed since he's been in prison, and Joseph is remaining faithful to God. Now remember, let me set this backdrop too before we jump in chapter 41. Just prior to chapter 41, we had this situation where Joseph was in prison and he encounters two people who've been servants of Pharaoh. And these two people have the cupbearer and the baker. They both have dreams, and Joseph interprets their dreams in prison and he interprets them correctly. And in one case, the cupbearer lives. In the other case, the other servant is is hanged. And so the interpretation of Joseph's dreams ended up being true. And the cupbearer was supposed to remember Joseph before Pharaoh when he went before Pharaoh, and he forgot about Joseph. And so Joseph is now languished in prison for another 2 years. The stakes grow higher. Joseph now comes to Pharaoh's court because now Pharaoh is having dreams, and Pharaoh needs somebody to interpret those dreams. All right, let's jump into chapter 41. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile River, and there came up out of the Nile 7 sleek and fat cows, and they grazed in the reed grass. Then 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and thin cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows, and Pharaoh awoke. Then he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. Then 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Pharaoh awoke, and it was a dream. In the morning his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, this cupbearer is the one whose dreams Joseph interpreted 2 years ago. The chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my faults today. Once Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own meaning. A young Hebrew, Joseph, was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each according to his dream. As he interpreted to us, so it turned out. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Verse 14, Then Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was hurriedly brought out of the dungeon. When he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, It is not I. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. All right, let's stop there for just a moment. So what's happened, you see, is that word about Joseph has gotten to Pharaoh through the cupbearer, and so it comes to Pharaoh's attention, and so he sends off for Joseph, and Joseph comes, and Joseph is clear, though, it is not him, but it is God who will answer Pharaoh's questions about the dreams. I want to pause here to say, you'll see on the outline there, I want to pause here to note Joseph's faithfulness, Joseph's obedience to God. You know, Joseph had a bit of a rough beginning back home, but as the years have gone on in Egypt under these hard conditions, Joseph has matured. In hard times, we can either regress or we can progress. we can either slide away or we can improve. We can we can either get better or we can get worse. That's a good word for us right now during our own time of challenge and difficulty. Joseph ends up using the time in slavery, the time in imprisonment, the ups and downs, the roller coaster of his moment. Joseph ends up using those as a time to grow and to mature. That's not a given. It's not a given that with years comes maturity. Maturity is something that comes in time spent with the Lord. And Joseph has done the time. Joseph has done the time in prison, but he didn't waste the time. He used the time as time with the Lord. And so he's clear at this point that whatever good comes his way is because of the Lord. This makes me think of this wonderful book that I commend to you. It is called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, Discipleship in an Instant Society. It's by Eugene Peterson, just died a year or two ago, a couple of years ago. Eugene Peterson was a pastor and author and teacher and wrote a lot of books for pastors, but certainly books for anyone. And one of those books is that one, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And what he talks about in there is that the life of discipleship, the life of faith, is not just quick fixes and quick sensations and amazing experiences and all the rest of it, but it is this kind of slow and steady progress in the matters of faith. It is this kind of incrementally growing faithfulness that happens over a long life, a long faithful life. Not by the title, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. That is, we are moving toward God, and we understand that it takes obedience to follow God, and that it's a journey. It takes a long time. And Joseph's been on a journey like that. Joseph's been on a long journey like that through a lot of ups and downs. But he has demonstrated this long obedience in the same direction. As a side note, I'm actually thinking about a summer book list for us at Trinity, and I'm trying to think of books that we could be reading together. Maybe we read a book and we have a study group about it, or we read a book and maybe I write a little blog post about it and you comment on the blog post, or something like that. Or I'm thinking about books that we might do, and I've thought about this book by Eugene Peterson, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, because it's just so powerful, and I commend it to you. Anyway, back to the study. Pharaoh has these dreams, and he's looking for interpretations all over Egypt. It says magicians and wise men. Those are the typical cast of characters where kings and emperors go looking for sages and people like that to provide some sort of an interpretation. In the ancient world, dreams were viewed by the ancients as having significance, especially for rulers, so that when kings, pharaohs, emperors had dreams, it was assumed that they weren't just some oddity or some oddball, something that happens when we sleep, the way we think of dreams. For rulers, it was assumed that when a ruler has a dream, that dream means something significant, and that often that dream can be from God, or in Egypt, from the gods, little g gods. So it's natural then that Pharaoh would go looking for somebody to help interpret his dreams, because that dream has an implication for how he will lead as a ruler. And so he goes looking for that. He goes looking for signs about what this might mean for the future. So dreams are significant, especially for ruling types. Now, you and I could count and survey a ton of examples all through the Bible of where dreams show up, and dreams are significant ways that God or the angels of God, the Spirit of God, speak to people. We can think of examples not too far back in just the book of Genesis. Remember, Joseph's father Jacob was also a dreamer. Joseph's father Jacob had that dream of the stair steps to heaven, the ladder, ascending and descending. Jacob has that pseudo dream where he's wrestling with, we find out, with God in the night. Abraham had dreams. Dreams go way on back, and then dreams continue on from here. We know that the announcement of the Messiah coming, Jesus, came as a dream to Mary, to Joseph, There's just dreams all throughout. And so dreams were thought of as mediums through which God can send us a message. There are countless examples of that in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Now, it might make you think, well, what about our dreams today? What about our dreams today? Most of us are fairly dismissive of our dreams today. That is, dreams while we're sleeping. Most of us are fairly dismissive of those. Our experience of dreams is kind of this whole jumble of things that don't make any sense. Usually people and things that don't ordinarily go together are jumbled together in dreams. Things are all mixed up and bobbled up, and places and people and things and times and all these kinds of things are just jumbled and odd and weird. That's how we think of dreams, and then we just kind of leave them to the side. Now, some dreams can be very troublesome. Some of them can be inspiring. Over my pastoral life, I have heard tons of people talk about dreams in a variety of ways, experiences that you've had with dreams. I know I've had experiences with dreams that have been really interesting. I think there's some things that we can learn from the story about dreams, and I want to say a few things about that a little bit later. I think I had that a little bit later in our takeaways for present-day disciples. But I want you to put a pin there and not just be so dismissive about dreams that you have at night while you're sleeping. But then there are other kinds of dreams, aren't there? There are daydreams, we usually call them, where we're awake, but we're drifting off and we think we have sort of a vision of something, or we're thinking about something, or maybe we have a dream to make something happen, or we've been given some kind of an idea. Those all can classify as dreams. So I want you to hold on to the idea of dreams, and we're going to talk about those at the end of the study tonight. All right. In terms of our text here, I want you to think about in what ways the dreams of Pharaoh mirror Joseph's own earlier dreams. Now, Pharaoh's dreams are like the odd dreams that we have, right? All these strange, bizarre things that go together. For Pharaoh's dreams, you got fat cows and skinny cows. You got skinny cows eating the fat cows. I mean, it's odd. I mean, it's bizarre. But it sounds like dreams that we all have, right? Think about that compared to Joseph's own earlier dreams. You remember Joseph's dreams that made his brothers so mad, made his father so mad? He dreamed that they were out in the field and the sheaves of corn were, his sheaves of corn were small, meaning he's the younger brother, he's smaller, but all the other sheaves were bowing down to his, right? Well, in Pharaoh's dreams, you have skinny cows eating fat cows. So I do think there's a parallel here between Pharaoh's dreams and Joseph's dreams. That is, there are small things that are triumphing over big things. You've got little sheaves, big sheaves bowing down to little sheaves. You've got skinny cows eating fat cows. You've got lots going on in this dream, and Joseph's got some interpretations for that. So let's move forward, because I don't think I'd read that far quite yet. All right, verse 14, I think, is where we are. Then Pharaoh sent for Joseph. We did read that. Verse 16. Joseph answered Pharaoh, "It is not I. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." Here we go. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream I was standing on the banks of the Nile, and 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile and fed in the reed grass. Then 7 other cows came up after them, poor, very ugly and thin. Never had I seen such ugly ones in all the land of Egypt. The thin and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows, but when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had done so, for they were still as ugly as before. Then I awoke. I fell asleep a second time, and I saw in my dreams 7 ears of grain, full and good, growing on one stalk, and 7 ears withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprouting after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. But when I told it to the magicians, there was no one who could explain it to me." Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same," meaning the 2 different dreams mean the same thing. "God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, And the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, as are the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and then after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will no longer be known in the land because of the famine that will follow, for it will be very grievous. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now therefore let Pharaoh select a man who is discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land, and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plenty years. Let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and lay up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to befall the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. The proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find anyone else like this, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only with regard to the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Now removing his signet ring from his hand, Pharaoh put it on Joseph's hand. He arrayed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in the chariot of his second in command, and they cried out in front of him, "Bow the knee." Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, as his wife. Thus Joseph gained authority over the land of Egypt. I have no idea if I said that name right. If any of you know a way to say that, you should record it and email it back to all of us. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. Okay, I'm going to stop there. That's at the end of verse 46. I've gone a ways there because I wanted to talk a bit about Joseph's rise to power. Joseph makes clear in his interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams that he is not a messenger for himself. He is a messenger from God. And Pharaoh later affirms that by saying, as he's trying to figure out who to choose to implement this vision, he's saying, is there anybody else that's got the Spirit of God like this man? Well, decides that Joseph is the one who's got the Spirit of God in him. And that's affirmed here. Clearly, Joseph understands himself as a messenger from God, and he communicates that to Pharaoh. The dreams are a message from God. They are not a message from Joseph. Joseph is clear about that. This is a message from God about what is about to happen. Now, the interpretation, of course, we know that number 7 is very significant throughout the scriptures. Think about the 7 complete days it took for God to create the heavens and the earth. And there are a number of other places that have the number 7 as something very significant. But here we hear about there will be 7 years of plenty, 7 years of abundance, agriculturally, economically, and all the rest. So the question, though, lingers here. How will those 7 years be used? Big question. How do you use the times of abundance? And then there's going to be 7 years of famine. And the question there is, how will that 7 years of famine be used? Big question, then and now. And then verse 31, which we read, is this nugget of wisdom and truth about how it is we behave in both times of abundance and plenty and times of scarcity and famine. Verse 31 essentially says, we're not good at remembering times of abundance when times are scarce. We are to take time for gratitude and celebration. That's my add to the verse. But it's clear in verse 31. It's clear in verse 31. Let's hear it again. The plenty will no longer be known in the land because of the famine that will follow, for it will be very grievous. So when times are difficult and times are scarce, it's very hard to remember when times were good, right? We can sink down into a hole and remember that things are challenging. It's very hard to remember when things were good. It's kind of like when you're in the dead of winter, even in Southeast Texas winter, when you're in the dead of winter, you can hardly feel what it was like to have a 110-degree day in July. Likewise, in July, it's very hard to remember what it was like for it to be freezing in January. Well, this is true in times of lean, in times of famine, in times of difficulty and challenge. It's so very hard to conjure up feelings of gratitude and remembering how things were once good. And that truth is expressed here in verse 31. Joseph really steps out on a limb, gets out on a limb here, though. He not only interprets the dreams, but Joseph then goes another step. He extends himself and says, all right, these are the dreams and this is what they mean. But then Joseph then gives a plan. Joseph says, take advantage of the 7 years that you have in order to prepare for the lean times, and then appoint a leader to help do it. So Joseph is unique in that Joseph is a dreamer and now he is a doer. He is one who can see the future. He's a prophet in that sense. He can see the future, but he can also know how to plan in preparation for that future. It's a very unique individual. You know this, there are dreamers and there are doers, and they are not often the same person. We need both of them. We need people who can dream great dreams and cast great visions, but they are often not the same people who know how to implement those dreams and visions. We see that in politics, in governing, in church, in the workplace. The new boss comes in and they cast a big vision, but they need people around them to help execute that vision, that dream. The same is often true in the church. The same is often true in government and in the world. You may have inspiring, charismatic politicians who capture the attention, the imagination of the people, but they are not always the ones who are able to implement. If they are wise, they surround themselves with people who know how to do that. So Joseph here is a unique individual in that he spent his early life as a dreamer, and then he went through a lot of difficult things. Here, he interprets somebody else's dreams, that is Pharaoh's, and then he knows how to put that into action. He knows, now that he has this vision of the future by way of Pharaoh's dreams, he knows how to help Pharaoh plan for that future. So he talks about using the years of plenty, the years of abundance, as a time of preparation for the times that are lean. The temptation in years of abundance and plenty is just to eat, drink, and be merry, isn't it? It's just to sort of enjoy it while it lasts. Take advantage of the moment without any regard for the future, without any regard for the fact that one day will not always be so abundant. That's just sort of the way life works. But we have a hard time doing that, don't we? We have a hard time thinking beyond the present moment. Instead, we must certainly enjoy the present moment with always a long obedience in the same direction, always understanding where God is trying to take us as a covenant people. Joseph understands that. And so he says, Pharaoh, you're going to have 7 good years, and you're going to have 7 lean years. So use the good years to prepare for the lean years. And the last thing Joseph says, again, is you're going to need somebody to help you do that. Pharaoh, you had the dream, but you need somebody to help you execute the plan. Joseph has the plan. Pharaoh sees that he's got the Spirit of God on him. He's got a plan. He's got a way to execute the plan. And so Pharaoh puts full trust, weight of government, responsibility, and all of it on Joseph's shoulders. It's an astounding turn of events for Joseph. I mean, it wasn't like yesterday from when Joseph was in prison for years. Joseph has gone through all kinds of ups and downs. And we're talking he was in the pit, he was in slavery, he was accused of assaulting a Potiphar's wife. Remember a couple chapters ago? He's back in prison. People forget about him. He stays in prison. Now, all of a sudden, he's been appointed the prime minister of Egypt. Prime minister is kind of the role you might think of in this governing role, or if you think of it in business terms, it's something of a COO role, Chief Operating Officer. That is, he's the one that runs the day-to-day operations for Egypt now. Pharaoh's invested all that authority in him. Joseph is able to enact the dream, and so Pharaoh gives him a lot of responsibility to do just that. I want you to notice also in this text, notice together that Joseph continues to align himself closely with Pharaoh. Joseph has been through a lot. He's very careful here to say it's Pharaoh's dream and not his dream. He's very careful to say Pharaoh's the one in authority, but this person to be appointed operates under Pharaoh's authority. He's very careful to do that. And so it's shrewd and wise on Joseph's part to stay in the good graces of Pharaoh. He's come by that the hard way. He's understood what it was to go through something difficult. But the other thing to remember here that's key for Joseph is that his concern is for the well-being of the whole nation of Egypt. And not just for the nation of Egypt, we shall learn, his concern is for the well-being of the whole world. Because as we're about to learn when we'll read further, this famine is going to stretch beyond Egypt, and it's going to impact Israel, Judah, and maybe beyond, because it goes to impacting his family of origin back home, his brothers and all the rest of it. So Joseph demonstrates that his concern is not just for himself or even just for Pharaoh. His concern is for the whole nation. Because of his interpretation and concrete plans, of course, then, as we know, Pharaoh appoints Joseph as prime minister. Pharaoh has the insight that since God has revealed these things to Joseph and not to him, then Joseph ought to be in charge in the role. This is wise of Pharaoh. So Joseph is entrusted with all this power. Now, what does that mean? We begin to see, we just read it, where there's essentially this ceremony where Joseph is given the robe, and Joseph is put on the chariot, and it's the chariot of the second in command, and there's all the ring and the whole thing. These are all symbols of power, symbols of authority. These are all things to symbolize to the masses that Joseph has had authority conferred on him, so he's acting with Pharaoh's blessing. And so all these things are symbols of power, symbols of authority that reinforce the role that Joseph now has. He now has a wife, he has lots of responsibilities, he's managing the economy, he's traveling, he's meeting the needs of the people, he follows through. That's what we're going to read about next. Let me pick up there. Verse 46, where we already read a little bit. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Lots happened in his 30-year-old life, young life. Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 plenteous years, the earth produced abundantly. He gathered up all the food of the 7 years when there was plenty in the land of Egypt and stored up food in the cities. He stored up in every city the food from the fields around it. So Joseph stored up grain in such abundance, like the sand of the sea, that he stopped measuring it. It was beyond measure. Just a little pause there. I didn't put this on your outline, but we've seen this as numerous as the sands of the sea used before when they talked about the descendants of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. So in some ways, I wonder if this abundance is also a symbol of God's blessing Joseph and his family and all the promises of old that we've talked so much about. Verse 50. Before the years of famine came, Joseph had 2 sons, whom Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for, he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. The second he named Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my misfortunes. beautiful that the names of his children mean something like that. What a beautiful gift to be able to leave the past behind, and a child's name to symbolize that, and then another child's name to symbolize that even blessing can come in places of misfortune, in the words of the text. Beautiful. Verse 53, the 7 years of plenty that prevailed in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in every country, but throughout the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph, what he says to you, do. And since the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. They do have to buy it. The economy has to keep going. For the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the world came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine became severe throughout the world. And that leads us up to the time when his brothers will come. But let's stop there for just a moment. Egypt becomes this model, not just for itself, this model of caretaking, this model of using years wisely, this economic engine, this caring for all the people. Notice that Joseph didn't just pick hot spots of places to store up food. The text makes note to say that in every city there were storehouses of bread, and that people in every city cried to Pharaoh, and people in every city were fed with the bread. So there's no discrimination here about who gets bread and who doesn't and all of that, except that you do have to buy it or trade for it. So Egypt becomes not just a model for itself, but a model to the whole world in times of famine. This opens the door to reunion and reconciliation with Joseph's brother and his family, because the famine has come to them, and so the brothers and family will come to Egypt soon. That comes, in chapter 42. That's where the outline leaves off. We do have a few more minutes, so I'm just going to read a little bit further before we go to our takeaways. I have several of those that I wanted to share this week. But let me proceed on in chapter 42. So, open your Bibles there again, if you will. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you keep looking at one another? I have heard, he said, that there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die. So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he feared that harm might come to him. Thus the sons of Israel were among the other people who came to buy grain, for the famine had reached the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land. It was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. And when Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. But he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly to them. Where do you come from? He said. They said, from the land of Canaan, to buy food. Although Joseph had recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Does this sound familiar? There are lots of places of recognition, times when we don't recognize, and throughout the scriptures, think about times when the disciples didn't recognize Jesus. But for a moment, Joseph, it's been a long time, they don't recognize him. Joseph also remembered the dreams that he had dreamed about them, and he said to them, you are spies, you have come to see the nakedness of the land. They said to him, no, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man, we are honest men, your servants have never been spies. But he said to them, no, you have come to see the nakedness of the land. And they said, we, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of a certain man in the land of Canaan. The youngest, however, is now with our father, and one is no more. But Joseph said to them, it is just as I have said to you, you are spies. Here is how you shall be tested. As Pharaoh lives, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Let one of you go and bring your brother, while the rest of you remain in prison, in order that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you or else. As Pharaoh lives, surely you are spies. And he put them all together in prison for 3 days. Can you blame Joseph? Hard to blame Joseph. He wants to see Benjamin, beloved brother. Understandably, Isaac, Jacob, Israel, Jacob, is protective of Benjamin, but Joseph wants to see Benjamin. Those the other brothers in prison for 3 days, also a significant number throughout the Bible, a significant number that usually means death, resurrection, of course, 3 days in the tomb, other moments of where 3 days is important. And so he does that to the brothers. But verse 18, on the third day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live." See that theme? Resurrection, life. "For I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here when you are in prison. The rest of you shall go and carry grain for the famine of your households and bring your youngest brother to me. Thus your words will be verified and you shall not die." And they agreed to do it. They said to one another, "Alas, we are paying the penalty for what we did to our brother. We saw his anguish when he pleaded with us, but we would not listen. That is why this anguish has come upon us." We learn a new detail, don't we? We learn a new detail about when they cast Joseph down in the pit that was not mentioned a few chapters ago when it's happening in real time. We learn that Joseph pleaded for his life, that there was anguish in that moment. It's a heart-wrenching set of verses, an admission and confession here. They think, gosh, we're paying the consequence. He pleaded with us, and we did not respond. And they've carried that guilt with them all of these many years. They've carried guilt and shame, and now they've confessed it to one another. Verse 22, "Then Reuben answered them, 'Did I not tell you not to wrong the boy?'" Because remember, Reuben tried to intervene. "But you would not listen, so now there comes a reckoning for his blood." They did not know that Joseph understood them, since he spoke with them through an interpreter. He turned away from them and wept. This is Joseph. He turned away from them and he wept. Then he returned and spoke to them. And he picked out Simeon and had him bound before their eyes. Joseph then gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to return every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. This was done for them. So he holds on to Simeon. Joseph's emotions are beginning to overcome him. This chapter, the rest of this chapter, and then on into chapter 43, and then on toward 44, and then 45, is this kind of long saga of reunification, reunion, making amends, reconciliation, and finally a revelation of Joseph to his brothers that comes in chapter 45. So this goes on for a couple of chapters, and we see the anguish, we see the emotion, we see just the physical journey from Canaan back to Egypt, from Egypt to Canaan, and so forth. But all the while, Joseph is caring for his brothers in the way that he can. Gosh, it's a dramatic story. It's a heart-wrenching story. It's a poignant story. I want to turn our attention to the takeaways that are at the bottom of the outline. I'll share them with you here. Mostly they come from Joseph. Remaining faithful, especially in difficult times. Obedience takes the long haul. That's the first takeaway. We talked about that first off in the lesson tonight, that faithfulness requires a long obedience. It requires a journey. It requires a period of time. It requires sticking to it. It requires cultivating spiritual disciplines. It requires a faithfulness to God. It requires prayer, worship, Bible study like this, time together. Faithfulness, especially in difficult times. And we're certainly in one right now with this virus spread, with the sequestering that we're all experiencing. Number 2, takeaway, pay attention to your daydreams. We don't necessarily have the tools to interpret them, but we can journal them, ask God to help us understand what we're to do. I give an example here. If someone appears in your dream at night or in a daydream, one thing you can do is to just check on them the next day. If there's a place in that dream, visit it or find out more about it. If something troubles you, give it to God in prayer. I think dreams are a mysterious thing. In fact, many years ago, I took a continuing education course, a series called Great Lectures, and one of the lectures was given by neurologist from Brown University who was the leading researcher on brain activity. And in the class, I actually asked him about dreams. Like, what do we know from a neuroscience point of view? What do we know about dreams? And this brilliant neuroscientist from Brown University paused for a minute, and he looked up at us and he said, "Not much." I mean, here's this brilliant neuroscientist who you think could have a lot of insight into dream activity in the brain. And he just simply said, we don't know much about dreams. He began to say a few things which you could probably intuit for ourselves. That is, that dreams in some ways are working out our subconscious, or working out the day's activities and interactions, and so all those things get jumbled together in a dream. A lot of people there's a lot of weird dream interpretations, so I'm not telling you to go and Google your dreams or go find some oddball, dream interpretation or something like that. Do not hear your pastor saying that to you. What I am saying is that there's absolutely nothing wrong with journaling about your dreams, or if there's somebody that appears in your dream again and it just prompts you to go and call John or Jane, why not go and call them? Maybe it's some mysterious way the Holy Spirit is saying, "Hey, John was in your dream. Call John. Check on John." You don't have to tell John that I dreamed about you, or you were, riding a camel, or whatever strange thing happened in the dream. You don't have to tell John all that. You just check on John. So that's one thing to do, journal it. But if there are things that trouble you, scare you, frighten you, puzzle you, give them to God in prayer. That's all I'm saying. Number 3 takeaway, we are given certain seasons of abundance to use well and not to forget. This is also a matter where we could do some journaling. We could practice some recalling them around the dinner table. We could recall them in prayer. Times of abundance, times to celebrate, times to remember the goodness of God, the good gifts of God, especially in lean times. This could be a wonderful spiritual discipline for us right now, Trinitarians, right now, where we could make a gratitude list, a celebration list. Some of you may already be doing this, actually. Naming what we are grateful for in a lean and difficult time. When lean times come, we remember to be grateful, we identify the blessings. If you have godly dreams, and I mean like an idea, a spark, a vision, something you're thinking about that feels Christ-like, it has to do with mission and service and prayer and discipleship and all the things that we know well. If it has some of those characteristics, come talk to me about it. Talk to David about it. Talk to your Sunday school teacher about it. Get others to partner with you in order to pursue that dream. We can't pursue dreams all by ourselves. Just like Pharaoh couldn't pursue it without Joseph. Joseph didn't actually pursue it without Pharaoh. People partner together to pursue dreams. And record those dreams. When I'm saying dreams now, I'm talking about those visions, those ideas, those little interests, those sparks, those passions. A little something that you have that you want to chase after. Hey, go do that and call the people together that can help you think it through. I also want to say a word to you about leaders who profess to have dreams. We've seen a lot of leaders over the course of our history, and I mean leaders both culturally, socially, church, in your workplace, all over, who have dreams and want to pursue them. And I think we can expect of our leaders to have dreams and to pursue them. And to invite others to help implement them. I think we can expect that of them. Not all of our leaders are visionaries, but most of them have things they want to do, things that they're passionate about. Now, part of living in a society like ours is deciding which dreams we want to follow and which dreams we don't. And that's a choice that all of us make when we go to work at a place, or go to worship at a place, or go vote in a voting booth. We're deciding sort of who we want to follow. Joseph is clear that he is following the Lord's guidance, and that the Lord has a vision for abundance and a vision for the times of famine. That God has a vision to feed people, to take care of people, to steward the people, to steward that economy in Egypt back then. That God has a vision for that. And he needs people like Joseph to help enact that vision. You can be sure that a vision, a dream, is a godly one when it means taking care of people, when it means pursuing abundance for people, especially in times of famine. Most of us have some measure of power. That's takeaway number 6. Most of us actually have some measure of power, and we are to use it humbly, and we're to use it wisely. This Pharaoh, this particular Pharaoh, actually found a way to leverage his power for good use by selecting Joseph to lead. And he actually exhibited some wisdom in doing that. And Joseph certainly did. Joseph, as a good leader, took on that authority and power that Pharaoh granted to him. And then Joseph got out among the people. He followed through on the plan that he said he was going to follow through on. Another important thing for leadership as we go and choose leaders and all that, or choose places to work or what have you. You want leaders who will follow through on the visions they have casted and the plans that they have made. And Joseph does that. Joseph follows through best he can on the plans that he has set forth. And then 7th, finally, lean times are a good time to reflect on who we need to be reconciled with. Might be a good time right now in this lean time to think about the people that you need to reconcile with. Brothers didn't know in their journey from Canaan to Egypt that they were going to be reconciled with Joseph. And we haven't gotten there yet in our study, but that's what's coming. They didn't know that, but lean time became a time when they came in desperation. They came in need. They came laying themselves bare for what they needed. They needed bread. But that desperation actually made them available. That surrender made them available for a reconciliation moment. So maybe this time of vulnerability in our culture is actually making us vulnerable to surrender to God, to surrender to one another, to make ourselves available for reunions and reconciliations. So I'll leave that to you. Maybe there are people that you need to call that you haven't called in a while, people you need to write, people you need to reach out to some way or another to reconcile with. Well, that comes to the close of our study for this week. I pray God may bless it. I pray God may bless it. I'm just realizing I don't think that I said a prayer at the very beginning of this study, so we are certainly going to finish with prayer. But I want you to know that I hold you in my heart every single day. The distance is very difficult for me. I know it is for many of you. We are working very diligently to try to connect with you, but I know nothing can replace the face-to-face interaction that we all enjoy. I'll promise you this, that first Sunday that we're all back together in that sanctuary or back together in a classroom or in the chapel for Bible study, that's going to be a big blowout day. It's going to be Easter, whatever day